G'day! In today's video, I'm going to be talking about a question that I get frequently asked. When should I upgrade my computer? Or when should I replace my computer? Both of those are very similar. Normally they're asked at the same time, especially when a person already has a machine. Now, I usually define it on a few different things. One, does the machine do what you want it to do? Two, does the machine do what you want to do at a reasonable time? Three, are you able to do what you need to do without tweaking the computer or changing something simple on the computer? And typically I find that most people usually just want to be able to web browse. They can jump on their computer, do some web browsing, send off an email, go on Facebook, whatever, and then switch it off. That probably covers probably anywhere from between 70% to 90% of computers that I would typically sell or upgrade. I find that most people would usually have an older machine that may be anywhere from 2 years old up to 15 years old. And so I'll just start with, when should you know, or when should you upgrade your machine? Typically, let's say you've bought a machine 5 years ago, you purchased a reasonably priced machine or a moderate priced machine, so you spent, let's say, $1,000 to $1,500 on this particular laptop or desktop. And the biggest thing that you've noticed, and the reason why you're asking these questions, is it now seems to take forever for you to be able to load up Google Chrome and do what you want to do. Typically in that instance, usually if you've spent a reasonable amount of money on the computer initially, that you would have got something like at least an i3, Intel i3, or a Ryzen 3 processor in that machine. Typically if it's something like that, next thing I'll be looking down the chain from there is what kind of hard drive's in that computer. Let's say you open it up and you have a 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch hard drive inside of there, as opposed to an SSD, then that would be the first thing that I'll be looking at upgrading. Typically quite often I can upgrade a machine that's running an i3 3000 series, so a machine that's nearly about 7 to 9 years old, around that age. And typically from there, if I upgrade that to 8 gig of RAM, add a solid state hard drive in there, most people are pretty happy with that performance of that machine. They hit the power button, they load up Google Chrome, they're doing what they want to do within a minute of hitting that power button. Compared to beforehand, let's say that machine had a standard SATA hard drive and a relatively low amount of RAM, I would find there that particular machine would be struggling to load up Google Chrome within 3 to 5 minutes, which is not acceptable. So when should you upgrade, or why should you upgrade? If you're utilizing the machine essentially as a tool and you require it to do a very specific task, let's say you've got an eBay site and you're selling stuff on eBay, there's no point having a machine that you're sitting there waiting 5 minutes for it to load or to recognize your camera to then download your photos. Stuff like that is a hindrance and is no good to be used. Potentially it could be upgraded. What you'd want to do is first check out the system properties of the machine. Usually the spot that will tell you the most amount of information is if you go down, or most amount of basic information, will be going down to the Windows icon in the bottom left hand corner of your machine, right click on that, and then go System. What that should bring up is System Properties, and it should tell you what processors in your computer and also what amount of RAM is in your computer as well. Usually that's a good starting point to find out what can be done to this computer. Typically I find anything that has a AMD Sempron, an Athlon, or an Intel Celeron or Intel Pentium, those machines I find don't really react that well when changing the hard drive to a solid state or SSD. Once you change it to that particular drive, I found performance to be almost hard to actually spot the difference, which typically people that have those machines, they've bought the computer for $500 or $400 5 years ago, and they bought the most cheapest laptop they could possibly buy or the most cheapest desktop they could possibly buy. Those things I usually classify as almost instant e-waste, especially the laptop side of things, which cannot have their processor upgraded. So typically they'd be looking at buying a whole new machine. I find that, let's say you're using the machine for gaming or video games, so typically a laptop you'll have to buy a new one to be able to get a better graphics card in that machine. So you'd potentially be buying a new one, selling off your old laptop and moving and upgrading from there. On a desktop you can potentially buy graphics cards not at a cheap price at this point of time, but there are graphics cards you could upgrade in your machine. If you've got something like a 6th Gen i5, so an i5 6500 in your desktop computer, potentially you'd be able to add in something like a 3060 or a Radeon 6600. Granted, both of those cards will be fairly limited by the processor, but you could do an incremental upgrade where you buy the graphics card first, put it in the machine, and go, okay, it's running great, I'm happy for now. And then your next stage of upgrading down the line would be a new board, processor, and RAM, and then potentially SSD if you haven't already done so. So you can do incremental upgrades like that as well. But typically, to come back to my original point of topic is, when should I upgrade or why should I upgrade? It definitely comes back down to that overall speed, and does it do what you want it to do? I find that I see plenty of people that come in with a computer that would take 5 minutes to start, and I go, oh yeah, just give it a minute. And I go, well, I just usually say, this is not a usable computer, you need to do something. And typically those people go, oh, I've got all day, it doesn't matter. And typically at the same time, yeah, you don't have all day, but you want to be waiting on your equipment, not yourself waiting for your equipment to do what it wants to do. For example, if you bought a microwave and it said for something to cook for 5 minutes and it's going to take half an hour, you'd be pissed. I would be frustrated with that. It's not doing its job. Your computer's not doing its job because it's taking 10 minutes to load up Google Chrome. Yes, you might have all day to do that, but you may find you have other things to do if you didn't sit there waiting for that computer to do its thing. So that's essentially the short of it is, if you're waiting on your computer, you probably need to upgrade. Anyway, that's a bit of my rant, and I'll catch you guys later.